and I help out here at the museum on Sundays and whenever I can. This building, we're calling it an Einhaus. It's not actually a German word, but for us it means that animals and people lived in the same building. This side was for the people to live in. That side would have been for the animals to live in. That doorway would have been, of course, much smaller with a doorway on it. But because animals like cows and horses create a lot of heat, in the wintertime when they were in the stalls and that, they would have helped to heat the people side. Now, this is the type of construction, this building is from 1844. When they came here in 1843, they didn't get to this area until the autumn. And it was too late for this type of construction because all these little squares, every one of these squares, would have been filled in with staves like this. And then in the staves, you pack this is one out of one of the original houses. It's a mixture of straw and locally dug clay, which they dug right out of the ground here. I don't know if they showed you the pad. Did they show you the pottery in the house? That was dug right out of the creek across the street at the back of those lots. And then that would dry to real hard. If you can all come over and look at these pictures here. These are pictures of buildings still standing in Germany. In the part of Germany where these people came from, I think I've seen 3 wooden buildings. Because by the time the 1600s, 1700s came along, all the forests had been chopped down already. And they were not allowed to use wood to cut, like with this building, all the boards you see on the outside, to fill that in, they would have not have been there. It would have all looked like this filled in with clay timber. So all the buildings in Germany in the area where our villages are, the buildings are all either stucco or this type. In the little town of Brusel, they figure the oldest house they have there is, well, the first time I was over there was about 10, 15 years ago now. So that was 400 and some years old then. So it would be even older now. So say getting close to 500 years old. And then there are some places there where there's old parts of castles and the churches over there go back to the 1200s. And the church was always the most fortified building in the village. So if the bell started to ring when it shouldn't ring, you knew to take your animals and run for the church because the village was being attacked. So the church was the most fortified. And there is like in Brusel, quite a bit of the town wall is still left there. But you would run for the church and take your animals with you. That's why many churches have an altar rail or a rood screen or something. It was to keep the animals off the altar. Let's see, what else? This picture here, that's how it looked before this stood over about in the other corner of Berkel's, over on Stoughton Street. And it looked like that. Then they took it apart and that was the frame before they took it down. Then they marked all of the timbers. See that 10 mark there? They marked all the timbers where it was and took it down. It was stored for about 10 years. And we finally got enough money to put it back up. And they used the markers to put the beams back where they should have been. And then a few of them had to be replaced because originally the bottom beams were set on split field stone. So they were about that far off the ground. And because the weather here, the winters are slightly different than they are over in Prussia. It's harsher winters here. Every year when the spring thaw would come, that stone would sink a little bit further into the soil. So finally, by the 1940s, 1950s, the bottom beam was sitting right on the soil and started to rot. That's why we lost so many of these buildings. But there are still a few of them that look like that, but they're covered over with clapboards. There's a few around the area. There's one over on Jago Road. There's actually 2, and one's in real bad shape. It's not being lived in. and the one is let's see, this is very heavy. This is a piece of burl wood. Burl grows at the base of the tree. It's like a big knot, and it's very, very hard wood. So this is very, very heavy. And when you see these pegs, this building, there were no nails used. All these pegs, and there's a couple still sticking out up there where they let them stick out. Anything where it had to be butted together, if it wouldn't go together just right, you took this and you just kept hitting it till your peg went in. And you put square pegs into round holes, and and as the wood dried, it made a very tight fit. So this was the side that the people lived on, and I think this would have been just the room where it was a kitchen and living space, because people back then didn't have separate rooms for a living room and a dining room and a media room, and they had very little space. So, and then that back there, which I furnished as a kitchen, that probably would have been a little bedroom for the parents. And then there's a stairway back here that goes up, and this would have been covered over. We just left this open so that we can use it for a little bit of display space. And when we went to furnish it, at one of our meetings, I asked people, I said, do we need furniture for the Ein house? And Helen Jago donated this table, belonged to her grandma, and the chairs come from various other people. This would have been not current with the age of this building, but probably around 1890 or so, this dining room table would have been from. Now this is an old primitive washing machine, where that lid goes on it, you fill it with water, and you slosh back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And before that, and even with it, really dirty clothes, like the men's work clothes, farm clothes, this is a wash water. You would fill that with water, and you would put it on to your wood stove or cook stove. I don't know if you've ever seen one like that. And you would bring it to boiling, and the ladies would actually boil the clothes with soap to get the clothes clean and disinfect them from bugs and fleas and stuff. Now, when you had cows,
it's the Ein house
to make butter,
where it
you
used
would
to be
separate the
on the Hasley farm.
skim milk from the cream, and then the cream gets
That's the
poured
building that was
into a
moved
churn
to this location.
like this, and you, for about 2 hours, you go up and down, up and down, up and down. I actually remember my grandmother doing this on every Thursday. She saved enough milk to make a few pounds of butter. And then once you get the lumps out of that and you pour the buttermilk off of it, which is a thin milk, then you have to put that lump of butter into a bowl like this, and you keep working it and working it and working it with a paddle like this. And eventually you work all the liquid out of it, and you have solid butter like you would find the butter in the grocery store today. And this is another churn. This is a crockery type of churn, but it's the same deal.
Would young girls their age probably have had that as a chore?
And young boys, because my father had to do it when he was a boy. You have a question?
I've actually seen my legs before, and when I went to some place, she actually let me pick it up.
Yeah?
It's like heavy.
Oh, yeah. You mean this part of it? Or the whole thing? Yeah, it's relatively heavy, yeah. And so if you can imagine about 2 hours of up and down, your arms had to be strong to...
And they have to go to a gym. They got plenty of
Oh, right.
to
Oh,
work
God.
out to surviving.
Yeah.
Give it back so much.
Yeah. Anything you want to handle or look at further or ask questions, please go ahead and do it.
You said that this building was taken apart and moved here from
Yeah.
Sultan Street?
Yeah, it was-
What year did they, was it? You said it
Oh,
was in storage for 10 years and then...
probably about 15, maybe even 20 years ago, because where the new house is now, they took down this building first, and then they took down the big barn, and then they wanted to, just like that down here next to St. James, that was a thatchwork house, and they took that, was not in great condition, so they took that down to build a new house. Yes.
Are you allowed to go upstairs?
We're not allowing people to go upstairs right now because it's kind of shaky, that stairway's
There's
kind
no
of.
railings there.
Yeah, there's no railings, it's a little dangerous, so, yes.
Are these like the original wood beams that they
Yeah.
used in the
Yeah.
original house?
Mhm. As much as he could save, he did. We had a man come from Pennsylvania that was he had not, actually never worked on a building like this. He never even saw them. You won't see a building like this. There's a couple in Wisconsin and there's a couple down in Winston-Salem. And you will not see a building like this in the United States. Yes.
Is that like the chopping tool, like an axe?
The one on the wall there?
Yeah.
This
No,
or this?
that.
This is, chowder?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you know how they make the chowder in the great big puddles? Well, you have to stir that chowder constantly, or apple butter. And I'll show you apple butter kettle in a minute. So because I can remember when the firemen still used wood fire underneath the kettles. And so you don't, because it's so hot in there, you actually stir like this. And you have to keep stirring, whether you're making chowder or apple butter, you have to keep stirring, because otherwise it will burn and ruin your whole batch. I don't know if you've ever seen how big those kettles are that the firemen make the chowder in, but they still do, to this day, they still use these stirrers, and they still stir. Like that.
So if any of you come to the Memorial Day services behind Town Hall over here this Monday, when they serve the chowder over at the VFW post later on down the road, there'll be chowder cooking in the back, and they will be using stirrers like that in making that chowder. So if you come and you eat chowder that day, you're doing, and you're benefiting from what they made many, many decades ago.
This is a breadboard that came from the Schultz family, and man, that's our president right now. He remembers his grandma every Saturday night making raised coffee cake on making the dough on that breadboard. Yes.
Why is there like Hershey's powder in the cupboard?
Well, this is old tins that people have saved, and then they don't want to throw them out, so they bring them to us. This is an old cornmeal. People used to eat a lot of hot cereal. You would take the cornmeal and mix it with water and make cornmeal mush. You would heat it up on the stove. This is baking, really old baking. There's probably, the men used to save them, put their nuts and bolts on. But that's an old baking powder, really old. That's probably from around 1920. Here's a real old liniment. They used to have a lot of home remedies.
To like rub on sore muscles.
Yeah. This Mother's Oats, oatmeal. Probably some of you still eat oatmeal once in a while. I eat oatmeal once in a while. And then they used all sizes and kinds of crocks. These crocks would have been the size used for butter. And then a big crock like this here, this would have been used for making sauerkraut or pickled meat, one or the other. Either you threw chunks of meat in there in a salt brine, or else you shredded a whole lot of cabbage, and you put layers of cabbage, layers of salt, cabbage, salt, cabbage, salt. Then you weighted it down on the top, and it will just automatically turn into sauerkraut. This type of stove, I didn't have a cook stove when we set this up, a wood or coal stove. So this type of stove was used from about 1900 on. If you had a big enough kitchen or a little summer kitchen hooked onto the back of your house, actual kitchen, you would have a stove like this. It worked on gas, so you didn't have to, the coal stoves and wood stoves were about like this and like this, and you fed them coal and wood, but they heat up. In the wintertime, you use them for heat, and they would heat up the whole house. So in the summertime, if you had one of these, you use this. There were also little two-burner kerosene stoves. Yes?
Is that how they kept the butter?
This? This is actually an iron. You heated the iron up on the stove because you didn't have electricity. So you heated the iron up till it got real hot, and then you ironed your clothes. And my great aunt actually one day forgot what she was doing and set the iron down on the stove, and that's where the scorch mark comes from.
Would people use the recipes from these cookbooks?
Yes, yes, those are probably after 1900, all those cookbooks, yeah. Now I have a few more at home I'm sorting out. My mom and dad have passed away now, and I'm sorting out their house, and I have a few old ones that I'll probably bring over here. First on, when people first lived in this house, they probably would have used, actually they probably would have gone to bed when it got dark, but they also would have used candles. I think in the other house there are a couple candle molds. But then about the time of the Civil War, this is not an antique one, not an old one, but a kerosene lamp like this would have been, an oil lamp, yeah, that would have been used for light. And again, several different sizes of crocks. I can actually remember my grandmother using a crock a little bit bigger than that one, and she would make, when she butchered the pigs, she would make a lot of patties of sausage. Like you can still buy pork sausage patties in the grocery store today. And she would cook them about halfway through, almost cooked through. And then she'd put a layer of lard, which is the fat you get out of the pig, and a layer of those sausage patties, layer of lard, sausage patty, and she'd just layer it right to the top. And she kept that all winter long in the back shed in the cold. And when she wanted a fast supper, she could just take a few of those patties out of there, heat them up in her frying pan, and cook some potatoes with it, and she had a fast supper. Any more questions about this side? This is how you brought your coal into the house floor, the cook stove in the kitchen, and the parlor stove in the living room. You would go out to the basement or the wood shed or wherever your coal was stored, and you put your coal in there, and then you would shovel it into the stove with one of these little shovels. Yes.
Is that like for heating something?
These stones would have been used a long time ago. They would have been heated up, like when people had to drive buggies and sleighs in the wintertime. This is quite heavy. I don't know if you can lift that or not. And anyway, it's probably soapstone, and it would get really good and warm, and you would wrap it in like a piece of blanket and put your feet on it, or next to you or whatever, and it would warm you up while you were out in the wintertime in the sleigh or in the wagon if it wasn't too deep for snow. And here's another one. This one's in that kind of.
So that's what they meant by like hot bricks.
Yeah, people would use bricks too, but these are a little fancier because they've got a handle.
Right.
Yeah.
How old is that stove?
This stove, I would say around 1900, so this is 120 some years probably. It might even be 1885, 1890. So it's a good 100 years old, probably 120, 125 years old.
Did they get their water from like out at a well?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so there was no indoor plumbing. So
No indoor plumbing.
And see the basin, maybe you could talk a little bit about the picture in the
Now
basin there.
before we have refrigerators, at first they would have kept things outside in the wintertime in a box, or if you had a basement, this building wouldn't have had a basement. But later on then, you put a block of ice here, and then you would put your food that you wanted to keep cold down in this part of it. And then there's a drain in there. But because there was no plumbing, there was no bathrooms in the houses. So sometimes if you had a fancy house, you would have like a pitcher basin like this in your bedroom. And mom or dad would fill this up with warm water off the stove, and you pour it into here, and then that's how you would wash up. You would take your washcloth and wash up with that. I have another one you can see up there that came from one of the local families around here. This actually came from the house across the street where I grew up, next to the old roller rink in St. Johnsbury. And this is not a matched set. Yeah, it is a set up here. And this is another one. This would have had a bowl like this. And it would have, that's how you wash it up. when my great-grandmother built her new house, about 1920, they thought it was really fancy because she had a pump at the kitchen sink, a hand pump, that brought water up from the cistern in the basement, and that was pretty fancy. Yes,
Are pictures heavy?
well, pretty heavy, and they must have been really heavy with water.
Be careful, don't,
Yeah, be careful.
girls, here, let me.
Yes.
Would butter be kept in the ice box?
Yes, yes. Because you had to keep your butter cool. Some of the people had like a well where they could lower the butter down into and the water would be cold in there, and they would use that. It's not all that precious.
Well, I just didn't.
Yeah, no, I know, we don't want things broken, they don't have to.
And so where did the ice come from?
Well, I'll tell you. You know where, actually they cut ice anywhere around here where they could make ice. But where Elderwood, where the driveway is to Elderwood off of Niagara Falls Boulevard, you know where that is, Justin?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
There were two ponds in there that went Cornelia Spurgeon. My father actually remember doing this, and that would have been, he was born in 24, so even into the 20s and 30s, they were still cutting ice there in the wintertime. And you had great big saws. I don't have any ice equipment. That's odd. I'll have to see if somebody's got some. You would cut, and any of the ponds around here, you would cut ice, and like I think I was telling you a couple of weeks ago, there were 3 houses over in St. Johnsburg, so there had to be at least 3 in Berkeley. Yes.
Why did they leave those holes in there?
Well, this would have been where a beam like that went through, probably. Maybe that beam wasn't put exactly where it was originally. It's hard to tell. Here's something you might be interested in.
Cookie cutter?
These are, when you roll out the cookie dough, these are real old-fashioned cutters. This, a duck, a dog, a fish, a bunny, a star, and a chick.
Go see that?
I have a few from my mother's mother now, that I still use sometimes at Christmas time. The fish is kind of an odd one. The rest of them are relatively common, but the fish is kind of an odd one. All right. Any more questions on this side? This chair needs work, and you probably saw the one in the outer house that exactly matches it, and it was made locally. We had, when the people came here, they had all kinds of craftsmen. They had farmers and all kinds of craftsmen that would actually make furniture. The one kitchen cabinet in the other house with the mesh over the top part of it, that one of my great-great-grandfathers made that. Okay. This is a loom. When the people first came here, they grew a lot of sheep around here. So they had wool. The wool was actually spun into thread, and then this is only a 2-harness loom. So you would weave rugs on this. Some of the older looms were fancier, and the people actually, about the time the people came here, commercial cloth was really becoming available. But they still made some of their own cloth, because they grew sheep for wool, they grew flax to make linen. In fact, flax is really, really labor intensive, because when flax grows, it has a yellow flower at the top, but you use the stem, and the stem is like a cattail. It's all meshy, and first you soak it in water. People used to actually take it to a creek. They would all do it together, and they would take it, and you have to mash it, and then you use tools like this. Some of these, I think this is for flax. You have to keep going like this and like this. You do the same thing with wool, to card wool. They're slightly different, they're bigger. And you have to do this before you actually can even spin it into cloth, into thread, and then weave it into cloth. But there were several men weavers, commercial weavers, that came with this route. So there would have been quite a bit of weaving done around here. Now this is the horse blanket. The man had this favorite horse, and when his horse died, he actually had the horse skin and had, so this is the actual skin and fur of the horse. And he had it made into a horse blanket so that he would always have his horse with him. This is a church view from one of the churches that no longer exists in the village here. It's over on Aurora Street, I believe. And this, I remember this church view sitting on the front porch of the house that stood where the Wheatfield Town Hall is now, where John and Yulee Mall lived. That was a mall farm for many generations. And this church pew stood there after that church was closed down. They brought this home, and they used this on their front porch to sit on for, oh my God, years and years. In fact, you all probably still had it on when he moved out of that house. And then it was taken down, and the whole town hall buildings were put up over there.
In one of the last pictures of that farmhouse, you can still see that
The
old pew
pew, yeah.
on the front porch.
Yep, I can remember it.
Waste not, want not.
Well, and it was comfortable, it's a nice small pew, so. Okay, let's look at this side. How much time do we have left? About 10 minutes? Okay, well, we'll finish that. Let's see.